This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Good evening. We are continuing our learning about laws of Shabbat and specifically as they relate to the kitchen. Last month we spoke about what is cooking, different forms of cooking, what is from the Torah, from the fire or utensil that was heated by fire, what is rabbinic, a utensil that was heated by the sunlight, and we said that there is even a permissible form of cooking which is in the direct sunlight. For example, to put food on a cold plate and take that plate outdoors and it will be heated by sun directly. That's permissible even on Shabbat. We spoke about how to make tea. Briefly, we explained the difference between Kli Rishon, Kli Sheni, Kli Shlishi. Today we will speak more about how to make tea properly. We mentioned last week that Shabbat is a very important mitzvah that we have. It brings peace to us and our families. It brings blessing. And it shows that we believe in Hashem and that we are willing to follow His laws. And that is why a Jew who doesn't keep Shabbat, he is equivalent to a non-Jew. Not only a regular non-Jew, to an idol worshipper. Because he is denying the existence of Hashem. Or even if he says there is Hashem, but he doesn't control the world and I don't have to follow His laws, Chas v'Shalom. Now today we will continue. We will mention some terms and laws about cooking and preparation. If you want to have warm food on Shabbat, so you put food on fire or on a blech. What if you're taking something off the flame on Shabbat to serve it and then you want to put it back? What are the laws for that? Can you warm up a solid that you take from refrigerator? Can you warm up a liquid? All these we're going to discuss today. So let's start with the first thing. That is called, as you see on your paper, davar gush. Davar gush literally means a solid thing. We spoke about a liquid. By liquid, we said that there is something called yad soledet bo. Yad soledet bo, again, is a temperature that if you put your hand in, your hand will automatically recoil as a reflex because it's too hot. And we said that there are two limits to Yad Soledet Bo. The lower limit is 105 degrees Fahrenheit and the upper limit 175 degrees Fahrenheit. We have these two limits because sometimes it's a stringency to use the lower limit and sometimes it's a stringency to use the upper limit. And we have to use both because we're not sure exactly what that cutoff point is. And therefore, if I put something near fire on Shabbat, let's say I want to warm up cold water in the winter, I'm allowed to put something near the fire so that it warms up. But I have to put it in a place where it's not going to reach the temperature of Yad Soledet Bo. What is it? Here we have to use the lower limit, 105 degrees. By the way, where does 105 degrees come from? It says that the average temperature for a hot tub, like a jacuzzi, is 103 degrees. Some people, there are some handouts and sign up sheet, and there are some seats over here. Some people prefer the temperature of 104 degrees, but that's basically the limit. 105 degrees already is gonna burn you, and by the time you reach 106 degrees, if your skin gets to that, then the cells in your body are gonna start dying because the proteins are gonna decompose at 106. So anything that is higher than 105 or higher, it will feel hot, extra hot, because Hashem programmed us in such a way that it is a dangerous temperature. And therefore, we have to use that temperature and you're not allowed to put food that is not cooked or water in a place where it's going to be heated to the temperature of 105 degrees. Now, what about using the other limit? If you have liquid on fire, on the blech, and you want to remove it, to serve it, like soup, after you serve it, you want to put it back so that some guests are going to come later. You want it to still be hot. Here we're using the upper limit, and we say that if this liquid, while it was off the flame, it cooled down to the point of below Yad Soledet Bo, you can no longer put it back on fire, because less than Yad Soledet Bo, it's considered not hot enough. When you put it back on fire, it's going to be cooking. And therefore, you have to be careful with liquids on Shabbat, hot liquids. You take it off the fire, serve it quickly, and then put it back on. If it stays off the fire for a long time, you can no longer put it back. And here we're using the upper limit, which is 175 degrees Fahrenheit. This is according to Sephardim. For Ashkenazim, they have other limits. And again, depending on which posek you follow, some will raise the lower limit to 108, 111, 115, and some will lower the upper limit to 170, 165, 160. But for Sephardim, we have the 105 and 175. Now, we said that if you transfer liquid from the pot that was cooking on fire, that's considered kli rishon. Even though it's off fire now, it's still kli rishon, the first utensil. It still can cook from the Torah. Now, if I pour some of this water into a cup, that cup is going to be considered kli sheni. Kli sheni does not cook anymore. However, there are some things that are cooked easily, which is called kalei bishul, and even kli sheni can cook it. We spoke about it last week. However, this is only for liquid. If I take a solid and I transfer it from the pot where it was cooked onto a plate, which is kli sheni, a question arises. Does the same apply to solids? Do we say that when you transfer it from the first utensil into the second utensil, the intensity of heat that this food contains goes down and therefore it doesn't cook? And now some say yes, some say no. Why? The reason why a liquid loses its temperature and status when it's transferred is for three reasons. Number one, as we pour the liquid, it goes through the air and the steam evaporates and it cools the liquid down. So as it goes through the air, it cools down. The second reason is once you pour the liquid into the second utensil, the liquid takes the shape of the utensil, it touches the bottom that is cold, and it touches the sides that are cold. And it releases some of its heat, and the heat goes into the walls. That's the reason number two why liquid food loses its heat. And the reason number three why it is now kli sheni, second utensil that doesn't cook, is because on Shabbat we're concerned not only doing melacha, but also with how you do melacha. According to Torah, only the melacha that is done in a professional way, the normal way, is forbidden. If you do melacha in an unusual way, it's no longer prohibited according to the Torah, it's prohibited rabbinically. So the same applies to cooking. If you cook something in a normal way, it's prohibited from the Torah. But if you do something to it that doesn't look like cooking, then it's not a problem. And that's why we said that if you take a skillet that you left in a desert sun and became very hot, now you bring it home, it's very hot. You're not allowed to break an egg on it. Even though, according to Torah, it's permissible. But because once it's at home, you cannot tell a difference. How was it heated? Was it heated by fire or by the sun? And therefore, since it looks like cooking, we're not allowed to cook on a skillet that was heated by the fire. However, what if I take a cold skillet and I go outside and I crack an egg, and it's being cooked by direct sunlight, here it doesn't look like cooking because we don't cook in the sunlight, and therefore it's permitted. So here, when I transfer hot water from the pot where it was cooked into a second utensil, like a plate or a cup, it no longer looks like cooking. And therefore, when I transfer liquid, it loses its status of kli rishon and it becomes kli sheni. Now we go to a salad. By the salad, some of these reasons don't apply. The salad, as it is transferred into the plate, often you don't pour it from high height. Rather, you just use a ladle and put it directly. Number two, when you put it into the second utensil, the salad does not spread and take the form of the container. And therefore, only the bottom touches the food, but the walls don't touch the food. And therefore, it's being cooled a little bit by the bottom, but it doesn't have the benefit of being cooled by the walls as well. So these two reasons don't apply. However, the third reason still applies. The third reason being that since I transferred it into second utensil, I don't cook in a plate, I don't cook in a cup, and therefore, according to this reason, maybe it will still apply. So here there's a machloket, there's an argument between poskim. Some authorities rule that something that is davar gush, a solid food, does not have the leniency of kli sheni. So even though you transferred it from the original pot, it's still going to be considered as kli rishon, and you will not be allowed to put anything uncooked next to it. So this will apply, for example, if you put osh savo or steak on your plate, and then you want to put fresh salad. So since salad is not cooked, and the steak or osh savo is very hot and it's davar gush, solid, it may cook the salad. So according to opinions that hold that the salads don't have the leniency of kli sheni, you would not be able to do that. However,
wait. I'm sorry.
Yes.
I serve the oswa. Everybody takes the oswa on their plates. They cannot put the salad on their plate next to it.
According to opinions that are strict, you would not be able to put fresh salad next to something solid that you transferred from the pot. The only time, according to this strict opinion, that you would be able to put fresh salad next to something solid and hot is when that food cools down to below yad soledet bo, and that is the lower limit of 105 degrees. Even if you transfer it into the serving bowl, and from the serving bowl into the plate, it will still be considered kli rishon. Again, this is according to strict opinions. Fortunately for us, we have poskim that permit it, and that is the halacha, the basic halacha for Sephardim, that we apply the leniency of kli sheni even to salads. And therefore, if you transfer something hot onto a plate, it would be you would be permitted to put something not cooked next to it. An example is, you take hot eggs from osh savo. Now the eggs were just cooked, and they're still very hot. Are you allowed to wash them under water? Cold water? Or are you allowed to put them into a bowl of water?
Why not? Why not?
Well, if you say...
Yeah,
it can. If you put few eggs into the cold water, after a while the water is going to become very hot. And if you say that these eggs are kli rishon, and according to some poskim, even though you took them out from the pot, they still stay kli rishon, you wouldn't be able to rinse them in cold water. And then those drops that are left, then they're for sure going to be cooked. But according to Sephardim, it's permissible. And therefore, if, for example, sometimes you take them out and they're dirty and you want to wash them, or they're too hot, so you want to cool them down, you're allowed to rinse them, or you're allowed to put them in a bowl of cold water. We're going to speak about very soon. Now, the next topic is status of the ladle. We said that when you transfer food, liquid, from the original pot into the second pot, it gains the status of kli sheni, second utensil. Now, does it only apply when I pour it, or even when I transfer it with a ladle? Meaning, when I put the ladle in and I take the ladle out with the food, what is the status of the ladle? Is the ladle now already kli sheni, so that when I put it into my plate, it's going to become kli shlishi? Or the ladle, since it was in the pot, is still kli rishon, and when I put it into the plate, only then it's going to be kli sheni? Who cares? So we said that there are things that are kaleha bishul, that are easily cooked. So if the ladle is kli rishon, so when I transfer it onto my plate, it's going to be kli sheni, then I cannot put on it, for example, greenery, leafy things, or I cannot put on it tomato sauce, fresh tomatoes, because they are easily cooked, and they can actually get cooked from the Osh Savor. However, if the same applies in soup. Sometimes people chop parsley and they put it, or cilantro, and they put it in the soup. And since the leaves are thin, they can get cooked from the hot soup in your plate. But if the ladle is kli sheni, because it's already a different utensil, then when I put it into my plate, it's going to be kli shlishi. And we said kli shlishi, even kalei bishul, we are allowed to put, just like we do with tea. So if the ladle is kli sheni, that's good for us. Then the plate becomes kli shlishi. And again, this is a machloket, but we consider it kli sheni, and therefore, whatever you transfer with the ladle onto the plate is already kli shlishi. However, if you put the ladle in, sometimes you serve and then you forget and you put the ladle in and it stays in the pot. If it stays in the pot for a long time and now it warms up, now it's considered like the pot. It's considered kli rishon. And now when I use it to serve, it's not going to decrease the status, but it's going to stay, the plate will stay kli sheni. So if you keep in mind that if you know that you want to put something raw into your soup, then make sure you don't leave the ladle in the pot for a long time. Serve it quickly and then keep it on a plate, separate plate. Yes, because since the ladle will be in the hot pot for a long time, especially if the pot is still on a blech. We're going to speak about it. And then the ladle will heat up from the pot, and it will be considered kli rishon. Yes.
Even a plastic ladle? They don't get as good as
That's a good question in general. What about plastic utensils? We said that when you transfer something into a different utensil, the walls of the utensil cool down the food. What if you use a foam cup or a plastic ladle, plastic cup, plastic plate? When I pour water into such a cup, it still stays very hot. And let's say I pour it into this cup and I transfer it into another cup. The temperature is not going to go down so much. Not like glass cups. But nevertheless, even though it's a plastic or foam utensil, we still apply the leniency of kli sheni. Because, again, for two reasons. Number one, as the liquid flows through the air into the cup, it cools down. And number two, having it in a different utensil does not look like cooking. And therefore, it does become kli sheni. Even in the plastic, right. No, the separate utensil. Now, the ladle, even though the ladle itself is not going to cool down the food, but it's still considered kli sheni, and I guess that has the benefit that it doesn't warm up by itself. So it will never become kli rishon.
So even if we leave a plastic ladle inside
Yeah, but
the
that
pot,
has a different problem, that it's not healthy.
it does happen, though you forget about it.
Liquids or solids?
For Sephardim, these rules apply both for liquids and for solids. For Ashkenazim, there is a difference between liquids and solids. Now, the next topic is...
Rabbi, I'm sorry.
Yes.
So when can you put like cilantro into your soup when you're transferring it?
With a ladle, or let's say you pour it from the pot into a serving dish, so that becomes kli sheni, and then from there you put on your plate, that's kli shlishi. But if you pour directly from the pot onto your plate, the plate is going to be kli sheni, and then you cannot put.
But if you do with the ladle,
But if you do with a ladle, then the soup bowl is fine. Yes. We spoke about it last time. It's on Torah anytime. There is a great variety in opinions what's considered kalea bishul, easily cooked food, and not. And therefore the advice is, and the rule is, that we treat every food as easily cooked unless known otherwise. So practically we try to be careful not to put anything into kli rishon, into kli sheni that's not cooked.
I don't know if you addressed this, but what about solid foods that have liquid in them? Like, for example, chicken, steak, or
Yes.
the oven where there's just liquid.
Yeah,
on
we're going to
bottom?
talk about it in just a few minutes. Now, next topic is bishul achar bishul. What is bishul achar bishul? Means, is there cooking after cooking? For example, you cooked something and it's hot. Right now it's cooked. I can return it to fire. What if this food cools down? Now it's cold. Can I reheat it? If I reheat it, is it considered cooking? So there is a difference between solid food and liquid food, dry and liquid. By dry food, we say that once it's cooked, it stays cooked. For example, is an egg. You cook an egg, it was liquid, now it became hard-boiled. If I cool down hard-boiled egg, it's not going to turn back into liquid. If I cook a piece of meat, once it cools down, it's not going to become raw. So by solids, we have a rule, ein bishul achar bishul. There is no cooking after cooking. And therefore, if you cooked something once and it's fully cooked, even though it becomes cold, I can reheat it on Shabbat. And for Sephardim, you are allowed to take food from refrigerator, cold food, solid food that was fully cooked before Shabbat, and you can put it on covered flame, like blech, or a hot plate. Well, it's not such a convenient thing to put on directly because it's going to become dirty. So you put it on a plate, aluminum pan, or yeah, that's enough. On the blech. No, on the blech.
But, I mean, like, if there's a flame.
Yes, that's for Sephardim. Ashkenazim don't do it. They define certain term in Chazara differently. We'll talk about it. But for Sephardim, something that was cooked already, you can reheat, and therefore you can take something from freezer, refrigerator, and put it on the blech. However, you can never put any food on Shabbat on open flame, even for Sephardim, because even if it's fully cooked before and you're not really doing cooking, but it looks like you're doing cooking. Someone who looks at you is going to say, "Look, she is putting food on fire."
What are you not allowed
to put food on fire, open flame on Shabbat, even if the food is fully cooked. Yes, that we're not allowed. Now, what about a liquid that was cooked before Shabbat and it cooled down? Can you reheat it? Very good. So here there is a machloket, there is an argument. Some say that liquids are just like solid, and if you cook, let's say, soup, when it cools down, you can reheat it. But the poskim that we follow, they say that liquids are different, and therefore, when you cool down, even though it's fully cooked, but it cools down, you cannot reheat it. The example is water. When you boil water, it has different status. The hot water you can make tea with. It has different properties. Once the water cools down, it goes back to the original state. It's no longer usable. I cannot make tea or coffee with it. So this is an example where even though it was cooked, once it cools down, it's not cooked anymore. According to opinions that say that it is still cooked, we can remember our mothers that say that if you, in a country where the water is not safe, you boil the water and it kills the germs, and even though it cools down, it's still safe to drink. So you see that, according to the opinions, that liquids remain cooked even after they cool down, there is an explanation for that as well. However, we hold that there is cooking after cooking for liquids, and therefore this presents a stringency for Sephardim, that once you remove soup from the blech and you serve it, if the soup cools down below Yad Soledet Bor, below 175 degrees Fahrenheit, it's considered cold already, and you cannot put it back on fire. However, if you removed it, you served it, not a long time passed, and it's still very hot, you are allowed to put it back, because it's still so hot that it's considered right now cooked.
How do you test the hotness? I mean, you can't stick a thermometer.
Right. So
Finger, or like,
it's not going to help, because our fingers a lot of times are already not sensitive to such heat, especially for women who always deal with hot things. They're much more tolerant than men. But in fact, according to halacha, you measure it by the belly of a child, which means if you would pour such water on the belly of a baby and he would get a burn, that's considered hot. So you can't really test it with your finger. So practically it's, yes, so therefore it's very difficult to say when it goes below 175 degrees, and therefore you have to do it as fast as possible. You just take it off, serve it, and put it back. And now, once we're here, if you're using the blech, and now time came to serve your soup, are you allowed to serve directly from the blech? According to this halacha, it would be beneficial if it just stays on the blech. And in fact, again, this is a machloket, but for us, for soup, you can use this leniency, and you can serve fully cooked soup directly from the blech onto plates. This way you will not have the problem of returning it, because it's still on the blech and it's still hot.
But I thought you said we cannot open it.
You cannot open it and close it if it's not fully cooked. The pot of food that's on the stove. Also, if you have a pot of solid food on the blech, you're not allowed to stir it, even if it's fully cooked. In a pot.
you have to take it off, mix it, and then put it back.
Yes, because when a pot is on the stove, even though it's on the blech, but it's on the stove, and you're stirring it, it looks too much like cooking. So you're allowed to serve. If it's soup, you can serve no problem. If it's solid, you should not mix it, you should just serve from the top. So that's why for a solid, it's not so practical to serve from the blech, because you normally want to mix the salad. So take the salad off, mix it, and then serve it, and then what remains you can put back on the blech if it's fully cooked.
But if there's, go ahead.
No, if there's eggs in the orsavo, so I don't have to take it off with the eggs then. If it's right on top without stirring it.
You
Can I
open
just
it.
take the eggs out and
Yes.
put the orsavo on?
Yes, you can take the eggs out, right.
And we can open it while it's on the blech. We don't have to take it
If
off.
you know that it's fully cooked, yes.
Yeah, mine is usually
Well,
Yes.
on Saturday it's cooked.
Yes. Sometimes the fire was too low and the eggs on top didn't get cooked.
No, it's cooked before Shabbat.
Okay, that's better. It's always the best to prepare everything before Shabbat, to taste it and to make sure it's fully cooked. Yes.
What if you're not using a blech on the stovetop, but you have like a warming tray that you plug into the wall? Can you mix on that?
Yeah, the question is, if you have a hot plate, electric hot plate, is it the same as the blech?
Because it's not on the stovetop, it doesn't look like cooking.
Yeah, it's the same halacha as the blech, so the same leniencies apply. You can serve from it, but you shouldn't stir on it. So whenever we mention blech, the same applies to electric hot plate. Yes. You can leave it for Shabbat day, yes. Yes. You can move it to a less hotter spot also. If you served soup on Friday night from the blech, you can leave it on the blech for lunch.
But it's no matter what, you just always leave it on the blech.
If it's liquid. For salad, if you want to stir it, you have to remove it.
If it is salads inside the soup.
That's fine, because the liquid, by nature, it always gets mixed. Unless the soup is very thick, and then you would want to mix it, so then you have to take it off.
So if I'm serving it, it's not like I'm stirring it?
No, because people see that you're serving it, and it doesn't look like cooking.
I'm sorry, just a question. So the hot plate and the blech, what about the heat diffuser? You know, those round things with holes, is that considered okay?
Yes, as long as the fire is covered, that serves as a reminder for you that it's Shabbat, not to raise the flame. So anything you put there is enough. Whether it's solid metal or with holes, it's good enough.
No, but I see the fire from the side.
Even though you see, but there is something under the pot that serves as a reminder. By the way, you can make a reminder different ways, either by putting the blech or by removing the knobs from the stove. So that this way, even if you will forget, you'll come to turn it and there is no knob, so you'll remember that it's Shabbat. Some require both, and therefore you'll see some blechs, they are flat with the flap going down to cover the knobs. That's according to the stricter opinion that you need to cover the flame and the knobs. But for us, one reminder is enough, either to cover or to remove the knobs.
So if I remove the knobs, I don't need to put the blech? I could put the pot right on top of the fire?
Yes. Of
What? What's the point? That's what I understood.
the reason why we use the blech is to remind us that it's Shabbat.
So I have no blech in my house. I can just remove the knob and I'm good. I can just keep it directly on the fire.
Yes, again, this is according to Sephardim. Ashkenazim would not allow that. They require both. But for us,
Whole life.
but it's still recommended to use the blech, because by using a blech you have much more flexibility. You can put it directly on fire, you can move it halfway, you can move it fully off, and you can control much more.
Put the blech afterwards when Shabbat already
Yes. You can put the blech on afterwards. Just put it gently because it might put out the fire.
Wait, can you repeat that whole thing again?
If
Next to the
before Shabbat, if you didn't put the blech on, you can put it on Shabbat, but you can only do it if the food is fully cooked, meaning you cannot pick the food up, put the blech on, put it back on, because the food will continue cooking. But if it's fully cooked, then you can do that.
Can you only put the blech on if you forgot that the knobs are off, or if the knobs are still on, you can still do it?
Then
Like the knobs have to be off
No, if you forgot to put the blech on, put it as soon as you remember. But
Even if the knobs are still on the fire?
yeah, you fix the situation as soon as you can. By the way, it's a good idea to remove knobs if you have children, because sometimes children play with it, and especially if it's halfway on already, it doesn't have the safety, and you can turn it on or off easily.
Question about that. Instead of removing the knobs, I have the safety things on top. So let's say I don't have a blech, can I just close the safety?
No, because the safety is there during the week as well, and you will forget that it's Shabbat.
What about crock pots? Like I don't use them. So I don't turn the knobs up. Like I'm not pulling them off.
Yeah, so there are different crock pots. Some crock pots have a knob to increase the intensity of heat, so you should remove that knob, or if you cannot remove the knob, take a piece of tape, write on it Shabbat, and tape it as a reminder.
Can you mix in the crock pot?
Mix inside the crock pot the same thing. No.
What if it's already off? Sorry.
If the crock pot is off, then it's fine. Yes, you can mix it.
If I have food in the crock pot and it was not cooked before Shabbat, saying the food was halfway raw, and then it was already cooked Friday night, would I be able to take out the the food out, and then put it back on Saturday, like Shabbat afternoon?
If it's fully cooked.
Yeah. If
Yes.
it's already cooked
Yes,
Friday
if you have food in the crock pot before Shabbat and it's fully cooked, you can take it out, serve it, and then put it back on. Now, there are some crock pots that have heating elements in the walls as well as the bottom. Those are more problematic, as we're going to learn in laws of hatmana, of insulation. That may be considered insulation, and that we cannot, it would be a problem to use such a crock pot. But if yours only has the heating element on the bottom, then it's not a problem. Then it's like a hot plate.
One more question. The hot plates, I have the kind that has a knob, but I don't use the hot plate any other day except Shabbat or Yom Tov. So, can I leave the knob on? Because I don't think I can remove it.
Again, if a hot plate has a knob that you cannot remove, you should just cover it.
Even if it's placed in such a way that I can't reach it because I placed it right against the wall.
If you place it in such a way, then it would be enough.
Okay.
Then it would be enough. Again, if your knobs on the stove don't come off, or on a hot plate, or on a crock pot, they don't come off, it's enough to tape it and write Shabbat on it. Yes.
What if a child comes and turns off the knob and whatever?
Turns off on Shabbat? You're asking what to do?
There goes
Is the case what? Yes. Now the question is, what if a child turns off the fire under your blech on Shabbat? So number one, if the food is fully cooked, you can take your food and bring it to your neighbors and ask them to keep it for you hot until you're ready. Assuming the neighbor is Jewish. Yes.
No, but you can't have a non-Jew come there.
No. Assuming you have a Jewish neighbor who also has blech, you are allowed to take it from yours, even though it's off, if it's fully cooked, and bring it to your neighbor, put it on theirs. That's permissible. If the food is ready to be served, you just serve it. Just because the child turned it off, even though he wasn't supposed to, but it does not ruin the food. You can still use the food. We're going to later speak about what if an adult turns the fire off or on, or cooks food for you on Shabbat by mistake or on purpose. That's going to be a separate discussion. But if a child does something that's after the fact, it's not a problem. Yes.
Say, during the summertime, Shabbat is longer of the day. So on Saturday, let's say I had my soup on from the night before.
Mm-hmm.
So then I have a timer, it turns off. And then after a few hours, it turns back on. I'm not touching the soup, it's still on the block. Can I do that?
Yes, you can do it. In fact, the question is, can you have soup on the hot plate, and the hot plate is on a timer, and the timer on the hot plate turns off and then on. You're not touching the soup, it just stays on, and the fire goes off and then back on. So that's okay. Not only that, according to Sephardim, you're even allowed to ask a non-Jew to put your soup onto your blech on Shabbat. Which means that since we say that there is an argument of poskim whether soup that is cooled down can be reheated. Some say yes, some say no. And since the prohibition to ask a non-Jew is rabbinic, so since it's an argument of poskim and it's a rabbinic prohibition of asking a non-Jew, we're lenient for Shabbat, for the Seudah of Shabbat, for Oneg Shabbat, for the mitzvah. And therefore, if you have a reliable non-Jew, you're allowed to tell them, please take out a pot of soup from the refrigerator and put it on the blech to warm up. And certainly you can do it with timer, but don't put the pot on the stove. If it turns on by itself, that's fine. Yes?
I have two questions regarding Oslo. First, I had heard that if you keep it on before Shabbat, if you keep it on, you don't need a blech in between. Is that true?
So, we're going to speak about it just soon. I just don't want to go into a different topic before we finish this. Now, someone asked, what is considered solid food and what is considered liquid? Because we said there's a difference of what you can return, what you cannot return. We follow the majority. If the majority of food, of the dish is solid, the whole thing is considered solid, and therefore you can reheat it. If it has clear liquid in there, it's better to pour it off and just warm up the solid part of it. But if it's all mixed in, like a liquid yosh savo, then you can warm up the whole thing, as long as the majority of it is solid.
I'm sorry, what's the answer to bishul by liquid? It's allowed or not?
It's not allowed. We follow the stricter opinion, and therefore we cannot reheat cold liquids, but it is permissible to ask a non-Jew to reheat cold liquids.
Or to put it on a hot plate that turns off and
Whether it's turned off and on, or it stayed on the whole time, you can ask a non-Jew to put the soup on. Now, next question is bishul achar afia otzliya. Now, we said that there is no cooking after cooking. But what if you roasted something or you baked something and now you want to cook it? It will have different taste. For example, you have croutons that were baked or fried, and now you want to put them into your soup, and they're going to get cooked. Let's say the soup is kli sheni. Let's assume the croutons are kali abishul. You put them into your soup, they're going to get cooked. The taste is going to change. Are you allowed to do it? So again, we have the rule that once something is cooked or baked or fried or roasted, it's edible, and you can put it into any other heat source on Shabbat. So if it was roasted, you can cook it. If it was cooked, you can roast it, fry it, bake it.
No matter how it was cooked.
No matter how it was cooked, you can reheat it. So, for example, if we spoke about it last time, if you take a slice of bread that was baked, and now you put it on the blech to warm it up, and it gets sort of roasted, toasted, not baked anymore. So that's permissible. Ideally, you should try not to plan that it should turn into to become completely crispy. But if it just gets crispy on the outside, or if you didn't plan it but it happened like that, that's permissible. There are those that forbid it, but according to us, it's permissible. Because it's already fully baked, which is like cooked. So, for example, you can take challah or lepioshka from a freezer and put it on your blech, and defrosted. And even if it gets the crust on the bottom, that's fine.
You said if it gets crusty, like, if it already happened post-test, it's okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Just don't plan it to make it crusty completely, because there are those that forbid it. Some forbid to put croutons into soup or to put pieces of bread into your bowl and then pour from the soup pot onto your plate with bread. But according to Sephardim, both of these are permitted. If you have something already cooked or fried or baked and you put it on your plate and then you pour something hot on top of it, it's permissible. Yes.
What if there's like, let's say you want to heat up a drink for a child, and it's like, let's say Snapple, I want to heat it up in hot water. How do I do it?
Yes.
With the Snapple first or the hot water first?
Either way, as long as the resulting product is not very hot. We spoke more about it in the first class. Please refer to that. Now, another example is you take meat that was cooked in liquid, and now you want to warm it up on Shabbat. Now, you take this piece of meat and you put it on a pot and you put it on the blech. So now, since it's without liquid, it's considered roasting, not cooking anymore. And it will change the taste. The meat will now taste differently. Maybe it's even going to taste better. But that's, again, permissible. Let's speak about using the blech. When do you have to use the blech and when you don't have to? Before Shabbat comes in, are you allowed to put a pot of food on open flame? Before Shabbat. We just said that if you have a pot of food on the flame, you might forget that it's Shabbat and you might raise the flame. It's before Shabbat, but it's going into Shabbat.
On an open flame without
On the open flame without blech. So here it depends. If the food is fully cooked, there is no concern that I might be worried that my guests are coming and it's not cooked yet, and I might raise the flame. I'm not going to be concerned because the food is fully cooked. So then I'm allowed to put a pot of cooked food on the flame without blech before Shabbat and let it stay there until I'm ready to serve, and then I just take it off and serve it.
It's going to look bad, though. If somebody comes and
It's not going to look bad because you're not doing anything. It's just standing there peacefully. When the time comes, you're just going to take it off. So you didn't do anything, you just took it off. No, it's there by itself. You're not touching it.
Usually people do, like I would think, like people usually do blech. Why is this person not having it?
Yes, if people don't know halacha, it does not make it forbidden.
But same thing, when McDonald's is using the bathroom, it's not doing anything, it's also our time.
You're right. You're right. But in this case, not. However, if the food is not fully cooked, you're not allowed to put it on the open flame. Why? Because the flame might be too low, and you'll realize that it's not boiling fast, strongly, and you're worried that it's not going to be ready by the time the guests come, and you might be tempted to make the fire higher. And therefore, in such a case, you must use a blech or remove the knobs. Again, if the food started cooking, any moment from when it started cooking until it's fully cooked, not allowed. If it's fully cooked, you can use open flame. What if it's raw? If it's raw and it's meat, you can also use open flame. Meaning, if you are cooking soup and right before Shabbat, it has to be right before Shabbat, before you light candles, you drop in a piece of raw meat. By doing that, you show that I'm not planning to eat this food tonight. It's for tomorrow. So for example, you put a pot of Osh Savo on the blech, and in it there is uncooked food. Since you're planning to use it for tomorrow, you're not going to be tempted to raise the flame because you have plenty of time. Overnight it's going to get cooked. And in such a case, you don't need a blech. And now, where is it practical? If you have a lot of guests or a big family and you have a lot of pots, sometimes there is not enough place on the blech. So you can put some pots not on the blech, those pots that are you're saving for later, and the pots that you need for tonight, you put on the blech. Or, for example, you have a pot of water, boiling water, because you know you have a lot of guests and you don't have enough hot water in the urn. So you can put a pot of hot water on the fire without the blech and let it boil. And then when you're ready to make tea after the meal, you just take it off, make tea, and everything's fine. And then if you want to put it back, you have to put it on the blech if it's still hot. Yes?
So, regarding if it's already cooked, and, for whatever reason, you looked at it, you're allowed to open it, right, if it's cooked, so you see that it's burning or whatever, can you take it off and then put it back on in the morning if it's already cooked?
Yes. With Osh Savo or any other solid food that's fully cooked, if you don't need it there now, you can take it off and put it there when you need it to warm up. So the same thing, if it's fully cooked and you don't have space for on the blech, you can keep it in the refrigerator until the morning and then put it back on the blech in the morning and warm it up.
So I have heard that, I'm happy with the previous explanation, but I had heard that because osvo is the type of food that gets better as you cook it, for that reason you're not allowed to take it off and put it back on. Is that true?
There is such a concept of food that is fully cooked, but it's still getting better. But that we'll have to speak about it later. It's a very complicated issue that's spoken about by many poskim. There is no consensus what's considered mivushal kol tzarko and mitzamek tovlo, ralo, which means it's fully cooked but it still can get better or not. We have two limits. One is that it's half cooked. Once it's half cooked, it's considered edible. Now there is a machloket whether if it's already edible, if you cook it more, you're transgressing or not. Some say that once it's half cooked, that's it, no more cooking it, because it's already edible. Some say no, it needs to be fully cooked. Now once it reaches fully cooked, then we have two more definitions. It can continue being cooked, and it's only going to get better. And Osh Savo is an example of it. Or it will continue being cooked, but it's going to get worse. An example of that is water, because as water evaporates, it doesn't add any taste to water, it just makes it less water. So if you have something that is fully cooked and it's only getting worse, then everybody would agree you can do anything you want to it. Because you're not interested in improving it. Now, with food that is getting cooked and improving, there's a concern that you want it to be cooked more and you will raise the flame. So that applies to open flame, right? It applies to open flame, but if you have blech, then you don't have the concern to raise the flame. That's briefly. Okay, now let's...
So just one question about the blech before you move on. It's understood that you cannot serve from the pot if it's on open fire, but if it's on the blech, do you have to remove it to serve it, or you can serve it from...
We said that if it's liquid, you can serve it directly. If it's solid, it's better to remove it from the blech, because usually the solid you want to stir before you serve it. And when you stir on the black, it looks like cooking.
What about warming trays or ovens on Shabbos mode or whatever?
It's the same as the black. Yeah, as long as you put a reminder that I cannot change anything. For example, you put a sticker or piece of paper, you glued it with the words Shabbat so that you cannot change any settings. That's enough. But again, you have to test it before to make sure that the Shabbat mode really works. That nothing changes when you open the oven door. Okay, thank you.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.